On my third wedding anniversary, I invited my husband to come forward to cut the cake. He came forward, lifted the cake, and threw it in my face. His secretary was laughing beside him. He angrily threw divorce papers at me and announced his new marriage with his secretary. I was shocked. "You cannot do this," I exclaimed. Then he threw me out of the event. I decided on revenge, and the very next day when he woke up, I had a big shocking surprise for him. My name is Dorothy Carter, and this is the story of my life, a life I once thought was perfect. I was in my mid-30s, happily married to Alan, a wealthy businessman in his 40s. We lived in Dallas, Texas, where the sun often shone bright and the sky seemed endless. Alan owned a successful import-export business, and I had a steady job as an office worker. We had been married for 3 years, and I was certain we were in love. I had always believed that love could conquer all, but that evening, everything changed. It was our third wedding anniversary, and I had planned an intimate celebration at home. I decorated the dining room with candles and flowers, carefully placing the cake I had ordered on the table. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the air, a dish I knew Alan loved. I could hardly contain my excitement as I waited for him to come home from work. My heart raced with anticipation. This was supposed to be a special evening for us. As the clock struck 7, I heard the familiar sound of Alan's car pulling into the driveway. I rushed to the door, a bright smile on my face, ready to embrace him. But when I opened the door, I was taken aback. Standing next to him was Tara, his secretary, a younger woman with an easy laugh and an air of confidence that I had never noticed before. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I took in the sight of them together. "Happy anniversary, babes," Alan exclaimed, his voice bright but lacking its usual warmth. Thanks, Alan," I managed to reply, forcing a smile as I glanced at Tara, who seemed to be enjoying the moment a little too much. My heart sank further. Why was she here? This was our special day. "Isn't this place beautiful?" Tara said, looking around. "You really outdid yourself, Dorothy." "Thanks, I began, but my words faltered. The room felt suffocating, and the laughter between them hung heavy in the air. "Come on, let's cut the cake," I suggested, trying to steer the mood back to what we were celebrating. My voice trembled slightly as I spoke, but I was determined not to let my discomfort show. Alan shrugged, glancing at Tara with a smirk. "Sure, let's get it over with." I led them to the table, my heart racing. I felt like a performer in a play, the audience waiting to see how the scene would unfold. As I positioned myself in front of the cake, I called out, "Alan, come on, it's time to cut the cakes." But instead of the eager husband I expected, I saw Alan's face shift. He looked annoyed, his eyes narrowing as he walked toward me. He grabbed the knife, but instead of slicing into the cake with joy, he plunged it down violently, cutting through the layers. "This is stupid," he shouted, anger flashing in his eyes. I froze, confusion washing over me. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. With a sudden movement, Alan lifted the entire cake and, to my shock, hurled it straight at my face. Cake splattered everywhere. My hair, my dress, my heart. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, the sweet frosting dripping down my cheeks. "Alan, what are you doing?" I cried out, humiliated in front of our guests, who gasped and stepped back. Tara laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in my ears. "I don't like you anymore. Get out of my life," he shouted, his voice a mix of rage and something else I couldn't quite decipher. I felt the air leave my lungs as the reality of his words sink in. "What are you talking about?" "Alan, please," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "We can talk about this." But he was done listening. "I'm marrying Tara. She's everything I need, and you're just in the way." The world around me blurred. I could hear the murmurs of our friends and family, the shock written all over their faces. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything but stand there with cake dripping from my chin. "You can't be serious," I stammered, disbelief coursing through me. Alan tossed divorce papers onto the table, the sound sharp and final. "This is it, Dorothy. I'm moving on." He turned to Tara, wrapping an arm around her shoulder possessively. She's my new business partner and my future wife. The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating me. My heart shattered into a million pieces. How dare you? I shouted, tears streaming down my cheeks. You can't do this. We built a life together. Not anymore, Alan said coldly, turning his back on me. I watched as he walked away, leaving me standing there, alone, a mix of shame and rage coursing through my veins. The laughter from Tara stung even more than the humiliation. I could hardly think as I stumbled out of the room, feeling every bit of the pain that he had just inflicted. The world felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. Once outside, I found myself in the cool evening air, gasping for breath. I needed support. I couldn't face this alone. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called Sophie, my best friend. Dorothy? What's wrong? She asked, her voice filled with concern as soon as she picked up. I need you. Can you come over? I choked out, my voice trembling. I'm on my way, she said, and I hung up, leaning against the wall, trying to collect my thoughts. I had never imagined that my life could turn upside down in an instant. Alan and Tara had shattered my heart and my world, and I knew I had to find a way to regain control. As I waited for Sophie, I realized I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. I would find a way to stand up for myself and take back my life, no matter how hard it would be. The night was just beginning, and I had no idea what lay ahead, but I was determined to face it. When Sophie arrived, she rushed to my side, wrapping her arms around me. What happened? I saw the cake all over you. What did Alan do? I broke down, the weight of everything crashing over me. He threw the cake in my face and handed me divorce papers. He's leaving me for Tara. Sophie's eyes widened in shock. That's horrible. You deserve so much better, Dorothy. I know, I said, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. But I need to do something. I need to find out what's really going on. Sophie looked at me, her expression turning serious. What do you mean? I'll find out what Tara is really up to. I can't just let them get away with this. I have to know the truth. With Sophie by my side, I felt a flicker of hope. I was determined to uncover the secrets lurking in the shadows of my life and take back the power that Alan had stripped away. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to fight for my future, no matter what it took. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. After that horrendous night, I moved in with Sophie. Her apartment was small but cozy, filled with vibrant colors and an air of warmth that I desperately needed. I was still grappling with the shock of Alan's betrayal, but one thing was clear. I couldn't sit back and let him walk away unscathed. I needed answers, and I needed to know what Tara was really involved in. Sophie sat with me over coffee one morning, her expression serious. Dorothy, you need to be careful. This isn't just about your marriage anymore. It sounds like Tara is up to something shady. I nodded, staring into my cup, the bitterness of the coffee mirroring the bitterness in my heart. I've been thinking the same thing. Alan wouldn't just leave me for her without a reason. I need to find out what's really going on with them. Sophie leaned forward. Have you considered hiring a private investigator? Someone who can dig into Tara's background and Alan's business dealings. The thought had crossed my mind, but I hesitated. Do you think it would really help? Absolutely. You deserve to know the truth, and if they're involved in something illegal, you need to gather evidence, she said firmly. That evening, after a long day of contemplating my next steps, I found myself sitting in front of my laptop, researching private investigators in Dallas. I stumbled upon Tom Reynolds, who had solid reviews and a reputation for uncovering the truth. It felt like fate when I called him and set up a meeting for the next day. When I arrived at Tom's office, I was nervous but determined. He greeted me with a warm smile and gestured for me to sit down. So, Dorothy, what brings you here? He asked, his tone professional yet inviting. I took a deep breath. My husband, Alan, just left me for his secretary, Tara. I suspect she's involved in something illegal, and I need your help to find out what it is. Tom listened intently as I recounted the events leading up to my disastrous anniversary. His brow furrowed as I described Tara's presence that night and Alan's sudden aggression. It sounds like there's more to this than just a failed marriage, he said thoughtfully. I can help you, but I'll need your full cooperation. Any details you can provide will help. I nodded, feeling a sense of purpose. I need to know what their connection is and if Alan's business is involved in anything illegal. Leave it to me. I'll start by looking into Tara's background and any possible connections she may have with Alan's business. I'll also check for any unusual activity within his company, Tom assured me. As the days passed, I tried to focus on my work and keep myself occupied, but thoughts of Alan and Tara crept into my mind more often than I liked. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, nor could I ignore the mounting curiosity about what Tom would uncover. Finally, after a week of anxious waiting, Tom called me with an update. Dorothy, I have some information you need to hear, he said, his tone serious. Is it about Tara? I asked, my heart racing. Yes, but it's more than just her. Tara is not only Alan's secretary. She's been involved in illegal drug dealing, using his import-export business as a front for her operations. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? Tom continued, she's been smuggling drugs in and out of the country, and I found evidence of her connections to known drug dealers. It looks like Alan may be complicit, using the business to cover for her activities. Are you serious? I gasped, trying to process the information. He could go to prison for this. Yes, he could, Tom replied. But it gets worse. I found records of large financial transactions that don't match up with legitimate business deals. Alan may be embezzling funds to support these operations. My mind raced as I absorbed the shocking revelations. What do we do now? Tom paused, considering his next words. We need to gather more evidence. If we can build a solid case against them, we could potentially involve the authorities. But it will take time and careful planning. I felt a surge of determination. I'm ready. I want to see them brought to justice. They can't get away with this. Tom smiled, sensing my resolve. Good. I'll get to work on this right away. We'll uncover the truth, and I'll keep you updated every step of the way. After hanging up, I turned to Sophie, who had been anxiously waiting for news. You won't believe what I just found out, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and excitement. Tell me, she urged, leaning forward. Tara isn't just a secretary. She's involved in drug dealing, and Alan might be a part of it too. I exclaimed, my heart racing. Sophie's eyes widened. This is serious, Dorothy. You have to be careful. I know, I said, taking a deep breath. But I can't back down now. I have to know the whole truth. With the support of my friend and the help of Tom, I was ready to dig deeper into Alan and Tara's criminal activities. I felt a sense of empowerment beginning to grow within me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about justice and reclaiming my life. And I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter how dangerous it might become. With Tom on my side, the investigation into Alan and Tara's shady dealings intensified. Each day brought new discoveries, and with every piece of evidence, I felt my resolve harden. I was no longer the passive wife watching her world crumble. I was becoming an active player in my own story. One afternoon, I met Tom at a small cafe, where the atmosphere buzzed with chatter and the smell of coffee. As I settled into my seat, I noticed the serious look on his face. Dorothy, I have some updates for you, he said, leaning in closer. Is it about Alan and Tara? I asked, my heart racing. Yes, he replied. I've been tracking their movements and finances. It appears they've been meeting with some dangerous people. Dangerous people? I echoed, my stomach tightening. What do you mean? Tom took a deep breath. I discovered that Tara has connections to a drug syndicate operating in Dallas. Alan might not be just a passive participant. He could be actively involved in their operations. I have evidence showing he has been making substantial cash withdrawals that coincide with these meetings. Panic washed over me. What does this mean for me? If they're connected to a drug syndicate, they could retaliate if they find out I'm investigating. That's a real possibility, Tom acknowledged. But we need to proceed cautiously. The information I have is valuable, and if we can present it to the authorities, it could lead to their arrest. We just need to gather more evidence to make it airtight. Feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, I nodded. I understand. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Tom laid out the plan. I want to stake out their next meeting. If we can catch them in the act or overhear something incriminating, it could give us the leverage we need. The following week, we set our plan into motion. I felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through me as we positioned ourselves outside a nondescript warehouse where Alan and Tara were expected to meet. I had to remind myself that I was doing this for my own future and for justice. As night fell, the shadows grew longer, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping in my veins. Tom and I waited quietly in his car, the streetlights casting eerie glows. After a tense hour, I saw Alan pull up in his sleek black sedan, Tara slipping into the passenger seat moments later. My heart raced as I realized this was it. Stay quiet and keep your phone ready to record, Tom instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my pulse quickening as Alan's car parked in front of the warehouse. The two of them got out, and I could see their body language was tense. Alan was gesturing animatedly, and Tara seemed to be listening intently, her expression serious. Tom and I leaned in closer, trying to catch snippets of their conversation. It was difficult to hear, but I caught words that made my stomach churn: shipment, payment, and discretion. Suddenly, a large van pulled up, and several men emerged. They were rough-looking, with a sense of danger that made me shiver. I exchanged a worried glance with Tom, who was already recording. "We need to get closer," he whispered urgently. As we crept forward, my heart raced. I knew I was crossing a line, but I had come too far to back down now. The men spoke in low tones, but I could sense the tension between them and Alan. The stakes were high, and I was terrified of what could happen next. "Make sure everything is ready for the next shipment. We can't afford any mistakes," Alan said, his voice steady but laced with an edge of anxiety. Just then, one of the men turned, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I had seen that face before. It belonged to a known criminal connected to the syndicate. My hands trembled as I recorded, knowing this was the evidence we desperately needed. As the meeting continued, I could see Tara pulling out a briefcase, opening it to reveal stacks of cash. My heart dropped. This was the confirmation we needed of their illicit activities. I whispered to Tom, "This is it. We have to report this." Before I could say more, a loud noise interrupted us. A crash echoed from behind the warehouse. The men jumped, and Alan turned sharply, his expression shifting to one of alarm. "What was that?" he barked. Panic surged through me as Tom and I ducked behind a nearby car, our hearts pounding. It was clear that things were about to spiral out of control. I was terrified, but I also felt a surge of determination. I was no longer just a betrayed wife. I was a woman ready to take back control of her life, no matter the risks. "Stay close," Tom whispered, his eyes scanning the area. "We need to be careful." As we watched the scene unfold, I realized that the path to justice would be far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The stakes were higher than ever, and I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter what lay ahead. As we crouched behind the car, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The crash that had startled everyone was just a moment ago, but it had shattered the tense atmosphere. Tom and I exchanged worried glances, realizing that this could be our only chance to capture solid evidence of Alan and Tara's involvement in illegal activities. Alan's face twisted in concern as he turned to Tara. "Stay here. I'll check it out," he said, his voice edged with tension. He walked toward the source of the noise, leaving Tara and the men on edge. "Do you think it was the police?" one of the men whispered, his eyes darting around nervously. "I don't know, but we can't take any chances." "If we get caught, it's all over," Alan said, his voice low but firm. Tom leaned closer, capturing every word on his phone. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through me as I realized we were on the brink of uncovering everything. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Alan walked further into the shadows, and Tara paced nervously, biting her nails. The tension was palpable as the other men muttered among themselves, their anxiety growing. I glanced at Tom, who nodded, encouraging me to keep recording. Just then, the door of the warehouse burst open, and a group of police officers stormed out, shouting commands. "Everyone, freeze. Put your hands up," they ordered. Panic erupted as the men scrambled to comply. Tara's face blanched, and I could see the realization dawning on her that everything was unraveling. Alan rushed back to the group, only to find himself surrounded by officers. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, confusion and anger flooding his voice. "Sir, you are under arrest for drug trafficking and conspiracy," one officer said, stepping forward with handcuffs at the ready. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I realized our efforts had paid off. Tom and I exchanged excited glances. The nightmare was coming to an end. As Alan was cuffed, he turned to me, his eyes filled with rage. "Dorothy, this is all your fault. You had to stick your nose where it didn't belong," he shouted, his voice echoing in the night. I stood tall, not backing down. "You made your choices, Alan. You chose Tara, and this life of crime over our marriage. You can't blame me for wanting the truth." Tara was crying now, her bravado crumbling as the officers led her away. "Alan, what are we going to do?" "You promised me," she pleaded. "Shut up." Alan barked, his anger directed at her. I could see the cracks in his facade. The man I once loved was being stripped of everything he had built through lies and deception. As the police began gathering evidence from the scene, I felt a sense of closure. Tom and I provided them with the recordings we had taken, detailing everything we had witnessed. This wasn't just about Alan's betrayal, it was about justice for everyone who had been affected by his actions. Days later, I sat in the courtroom, my heart heavy but determined. Alan and Tara faced the judge, the weight of their crimes laid bare before everyone. The evidence was overwhelming, and the truth was finally coming to light. They were charged with multiple counts, including drug trafficking and embezzlement, and the consequences were severe. As the gavel struck, sentencing them to 10 years in prison, I felt a mixture of relief and empowerment. Justice had been served. I had taken back control of my life, and I knew I could finally move forward. With Alan and Tara behind bars, I began to rebuild my life. Sophie stood by my side through it all, and I started to find joy again. I even reconnected with Mark, an old friend who had always supported me. Our relationship blossomed, rooted in understanding and mutual respect. This experience taught me that I was stronger than I had ever realized. Betrayal could shatter my world, but it could not define me. I had faced darkness and emerged victorious. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I was ready to embrace it, no longer just surviving but thriving, filled with new beginnings and endless possibilities.